Hi folks, other than racing fees, you probably spend as much money on running shoes as anything else that you spend on in running. So today I thought we'd talk a little bit about, what shoe should I wear? What's the best shoe to wear? A couple of terms with running shoes that people are sometimes confused about, and of course the age-old question, when should I replace my shoes? So first of all, when it comes to what shoe, there's stability shoes. You have shoes for people who pronate, shoes for people who supinate, motion control, neutral shoes. There's a lot of terms for the various different shoes you should use. And although there are some people that do specifically need a motion controller, do specifically need something, for the vast majority of runners, it doesn't need to be complicated. You go, you try on shoes, you find a shoe that fits like it was made for you, say, wow, this just feels great, and that is the shoe that you want. You generally, for most people, don't need to have a special shoe other than the shoe that feels really, really good for you. So it can be that simple. Let's take a look at a couple of running terms, or shoe terms, I should say. Stack height and heel drop. So stack height and heel drop. Now, stack height and heel drop are related, but they're very different as well. So stack height is simply the amount of distance between the ground and your foot. So imagine that you are barefoot and you put your feet on a piece of wood that is an inch thick. Your stack height would be 1 inch, meaning that your feet are 1 inch off the ground. That's generally going to be the entire foot. Now, heel drop is a little bit different. Heel drop in most shoes are about 8 to 12 millimeters, is kind of what's common in shoes nowadays. I'm going to tell you in a minute, I think 4 to 6 is better for most, a personal opinion. But heel drop is how far your heel is off the ground, not necessarily the entire foot. So in all running shoes except what's called a zero drop shoe, your heel is a little bit more elevated off the ground. And as I said, most running shoes today are 8 to 12 millimeters. I'm kind of a fan that for most people, 4 to 6 millimeters is a little bit better, because there are opinions on many things in running. You've heard me say that before. And one is that, well, when you have all that, because most people heel strike, even though you hear that heel striking is bad, heel striking isn't bad, overstriding is bad. But even when you're not overstriding, most people do tend to heel strike. And so the theory being that extra cushioning helps protect the heel. But that extra cushioning also tends to promote heel striking a little bit because it's closer to the ground than when you've got a little bit less. But again, going back to fit like a glove, that's what you want. I think you really want what fits like a glove. When I'm looking at shoes for myself, I usually look between 4 and 6 millimeters. One final point on that. If you're currently running in, say, a 12 millimeter, say, you know what, I'd like to go down to something lower. You really have to do that over a period of time. If you all of a sudden switch shoes, you're going to find that when your heel is suddenly closer to the ground than you're used to, unless you have strength, mobility, range of motion in your Achilles, you're going to end up being injured. So you would generally make it a gradual change. Maybe your next pair is going to be a 9 or a 10 millimeter, and you would kind of work your way down. But as I said before, your number one thing is going to be, does that shoe feel really good for you, fits like it's made for a glove? Okay, the age-old question, when is it time to replace my shoes? And there is really no one answer, so here's some things to think about. So the type of shoe that you have matters. So a trainer versus a flat is going to make a difference. Your particular gait, your running style is going to matter. The surface that you run on. Are you running on a track a lot, which is a very soft surface, or are you running on concrete, which is the hardest surface? And your weight matters. I mean, somebody that weighs 200 pounds is going to put more wear and tear on the shoe than somebody who weighs 100 pounds. So there's a lot of different variables that are in there. Now, if you have a flat, which is known as usually a racing flat, typically the range is about 150 to 300 miles, depending upon your gait, the surface, the weight, all those factors that are in there. The shoe matters a little bit too. You might have heard right now as I'm recording this, the Nike Zoom 4%, whatever the big long name is, a very, very popular shoe, very expensive shoe. That's like 100 to 150 miles is all they say that you're going to get out of that shoe. So sometimes it matters. But most flats, 150 to 300, depending upon all those factors that I mentioned in there. If you have your trainers, most trainers are going to be good. Somewhere between 300 and 500 miles is a typical range of what you'd expect out of a trainer. Going back again for that 300 to 500 miles, what's your gait, what's the surface, what's the shoe, etc. So ways that you can tell when it's time to change your shoe. So some people just go by miles. They say, I'm going to get 300 miles, 400 miles, whatever, and when those miles come up, they change the shoes. Other people use the aches and pains method, meaning as soon as they start to feel it, typically in the knees, they go, you know what? I think it's time to get a new pair of shoes because I can feel it. So they'll use aches and pains. Other people will do the visual test. They're looking at the tread. That's actually not a really good way to do it because I got a shoe. The part of the shoe that really wears out is in here, and you can't see that as well. You can look at the bottom, and certainly the bottom's worn out. You're probably worn out in here, but visual is generally not the best way. There's also something called the twist test that you can do. So I'll show you an example. So this shoe is it's a racing flat. It's getting towards the end of its life, and it may be hard to tell in the video, but it's relatively easy for me to twist that shoe. Here is the same model, different color, never been used, still in the box, and you can see it's a lot harder because there's a lot, this area is not as worn. That's the part that wears in the shoe. So you can do that twist test to see what's going on with your shoes as well. And then finally, really one of the best ways to do it might be, how do new shoes feel? Because if you put a pair of new shoes on, you run and you go, oh wow, these feel great. Well, that's kind of an indication that maybe your other shoes aren't in good condition anymore because you shouldn't feel a big difference between new shoes and your current shoes. Maybe they've gone past their useful life. So the final tip on that, I'm a big believer in rotating shoes, that you should have more than one pair of running shoes. You wear one day, one the next. A lot of times people say, gee, I don't know if I can afford to have 2 pairs of shoes. Well, you do have to have some money up front for that, but 2 pairs of shoes are going to last twice as long as 1 pair of shoes. So it eventually catches up. But if you rotate and you have 1 pair that's newer than the other, that's kind of a way to compare between the 2 and see whether or not you're feeling those aches and pains. So hope you found some of that helpful. The running shoes are very, very important. Probably after those races, your biggest expense.